Welcome to Brainstorium. I'm Anna Tizard, award-winning dreampunk and deeply weird fantasy author. And yes, that's me and my fiction that's deeply weird. Explore and imagine with me the most unexpected story ideas using the surrealist word game of Exquisite Corpse. Find out more and join in at annatizard.com. This is a storytelling challenge unlike anything you've tried before. Hello, imaginative people. I'm Anna Tizard, and this is episode 24 of Brainstorium. I hope I can inspire you and brighten up your day with some new Exquisite Corpse writing prompts and story brainstorms. And I'm very excited to share with you a new short story I've written based on one of the Exquisite Corpses from the last show. But before that, I have an announcement to make. It is, at the time of release of this show, almost the exact 1 year anniversary of Brainstorium. It was 20th of March 2022 when I released that very first episode. Now, the show was a bit different in those days, and I talked a lot about the surrealists who invented the game of Exquisite Corpse, and I had longer sections at the beginning where I explored some weird philosophical themes which fed into storycraft and the psychology of writing. Have a listen if you haven't already, and if that sounds like your cup of tea. Now, to celebrate Brainstorium's birthday, I've commissioned my cover designer, Emily's World of Design, to create a brand new logo for the podcast. I cannot wait to see what she comes up with. I've asked her to channel Alice in Wonderland vibes. Now, I've been thinking about what is the easiest shorthand way to describe what I do on the show and give people a feel for what I do on the show? It's tricky because it's very niche using this word game for writing prompts. And if someone's browsing for podcasts, they might skim over the introduction I've put up, and just glancing at the word surrealist will probably give them an image of strange paintings with melting clocks and things like that. And they might understandably assume that my writing is very experimental and so bizarre that it's unrelatable. Well, regular listeners will know that's not true, right? But Alice in Wonderland brings up very different vibes, elements of the surreal that are at once light-hearted, colourful, but also hint at deeply philosophical themes that we can relate to. Alice's journey is full of discovery and imagination, endless possibilities, it feels like. Just like the journey of writing and brainstorming story ideas. So why not? I think it fits. Having thought about this quite a lot, I'm now cooking up some Alice in Wonderland themed shows. So watch this space. Make sure you're subscribed to Brainstorium on your podcast platform, wherever you're listening, so you don't miss out on the Alice mini-series coming up soon. And now for my new short story. In the last show, episode 23, there was an Exquisite Corpse result that went, "The antiquated laundry built a golden throne for the grandiose taco." Okay, so I realise that sounds utterly nonsensical at first. So let me just read that out again. "The antiquated laundry built a golden throne for the grandiose taco." Okay, maybe that doesn't help too much, but put it this way. I started writing with a single image in my mind of clothes that had been left out on the line for too long, which was my interpretation of antiquated laundry. So it's getting old and musty. But why has laundry been left out too long? Perhaps the owner of those clothes has gone missing. And so I put pen to paper and followed the white rabbit of my imagination. The rest of the Exquisite Corpse, my interpretation of it, will come clear as the story unfolds. But thank you to Fraser Armitage, Captain Random 10, Tom and Anonymous for the words and phrases that made up the Exquisite Corpse that inspired this story. Are you sitting comfortably? This is The Great Taco. The Great Ed, local pub magician with a black eyeliner smudged stare, his lofty voice raised over the low chatter of the audience. Wearer of a golden cloak with a turned-up collar so large, people started to call him the Great Taco. Or perhaps it was that Ed always insisted on a chimichanga with extra cheese after his act, the only payment he'd got so far for performing. But the Great Ed, or the Great Taco, hadn't been seen for 8 days. Selwyn, his best mate, and purveyor of grand piano-boomed introductions as Ed swished onto the stage to a small, distracted pattering of applause, had called him 3 times and texted him 9 times. It was starting to worry him. Ed could be introverted, even withdrawn when he wasn't on stage, but they always saw each other once a week. Selwyn woke in the night, his forehead sweaty and a pit of dread where his gut should have been. There was no way Ed would just disappear like this and not tell him. They'd been mates in high school, shared comic books, paying half and half with their pocket money until Ed caught the show business bug and Selwyn got into his drawings and playing Duran Duran covers on his keyboard. But obviously it went without saying, of course he'd be Ed's compere when he'd made it. Selwyn sat up in bed, pressed his palms over his eyes and checked his vintage Back to the Future radio alarm clock. 3:35 a.m. He sighed. All these thoughts, his mind was racing, stupidly, bumping into ridiculous ideas and getting tangled up with nonsense. Ed's lifeless body lying crooked on the lounge carpet, Ed signing a contract with an agent on the quiet and waiting until he was languishing in a New York hotel room before he rang Selwyn to declare his big break. Or, the most ridiculous of all, Ed finally disappearing himself in a practice session in his back room, using that cloak of his and one too many Shazams. Ed would stumble upon a limp pile of gold fabric. The only other sign he'd been there would be the 3 desk fans on the floor, positioned at intervals as they always were for the dramatic swirl of his cloak. An empty hum and no Ed. Selwyn's gut gave another churn. What if something awful had happened to Ed? What should he do? If anyone had been there to ask Selwyn, to say, why are you getting out of bed and pulling on those jeans and trainers? Why are you picking up your keys and going outside? He wouldn't have been able to say. It was fear. It was the hot, quick burn of curiosity. It was a horrible certainty like ice in his veins, which did some kind of sickly dance around the heat. He knew one thing he couldn't actually know for sure, that the answer was in Ed's bungalow, and it couldn't wait until morning. It was 20 minutes' walk away, and that was plenty of time to question himself. The houses passed like blank stares, the streets drained of colour except under the streetlights where the colours gathered, looking false, waiting for day. The darkness did a sort of crawly thing, pixelating everything. It was an illusion of poor eyesight in the dark, of course it was, but it didn't make Selwyn feel any easier. He couldn't call the police or an ambulance. Not yet, not now, in the middle of the night. He had no reason to justify it. His feet slowed as it dawned on him. This was what he'd come for, a reason to call emergency services. "Oh, Ed," Selwyn muttered under his breath, "please just be asleep so I can really annoy you by waking you up at 4 o'clock in the morning. Then, please be alive." Ed's father was the only living relative Selwyn knew about, and he was abroad in Spain, as good as a distant memory, or as bad. The bungalow looked the way it always did, a bit ramshackle around the edges, but still a blunt, determined bulk in the shadows. Ed hardly used the front room. It had become a storage room for him, though he talked a lot about turning it into a mini cinema if he could save up for the right TV. At the sight of the front door, Selwyn hesitated to do something loud and obvious like press the doorbell or knock, but maybe he could see something around the back. Ed's bedroom was at the back, where a big window overlooked his small, tatty garden, and although there was a high fence around it, the lock on the gate was broken. Selwyn silently cursed his decision as he strode towards the side alley. He plunged into the pitch black, switching on his phone's torch, and told himself he was looking out for trip hazards and dog mess. But the intensity of the yellow beam only made the darkness around it squirm with a vengeance. As a child, he'd been afraid of the dark and thought of nighttime as a substance. In his teens, he'd always scoffed at it, but now, again, he understood the anxieties of his former self. He shook his head. What if someone saw him and thought he was a burglar? Why couldn't he have waited until morning? The tall gate gave to his push with a low rumble. Selwyn swept his phone's beam over the garden, the greenness of the grass remembering itself, hair-like shadows shifting in a slow dance. He started at the gold of Ed's cloak, dangling emptily from the clothesline. He reached out and touched it. It was damp. Selwyn's stomach gave a squeeze. Why would Ed go through the effort of washing his precious cloak and then leave it out overnight to get re-soaked with dew? His breath quickening, he flashed the light over the rest of the garden to allay the feeling that someone was there, watching. Nothing but the wonky path and the overgrown grass. A dilapidated barbecue squatted against the neighbour's wall, barely more than charred remains. The reflection of his phone's light flashed in the back window, and Selwyn switched it off. Just wait, give your eyes a minute. He crept forward, wondering how awful it might be if Ed was sleeping and woke up to find a face staring at him through the window. But Ed had done worse, surely, by ignoring his calls, and he should be grateful he had a friend who cared enough to come looking for him when he'd apparently disappeared. Selwyn stared hard at the vague shapes behind the glass. He made out the outline of the bed, but he couldn't tell if the duvet was just rumpled or if that was Ed underneath it. Just let me see that he's breathing, he thought. He held his own breath to stop it from clouding up the glass. A rustle behind him. Selwyn spun round, eyes wide. He fumbled with his phone, trying to switch on the torch again without daring to shift his eyes from the teeming darkness so he could look at the screen. There, light. The gate was still shut, just like he'd left it. The cloak wasn't there. Boo! Ed sprung from nowhere, the cloak swinging from his arms. What the? Selwyn clutched his chest, panting, staring. Good, eh? Ed strode around, plucking at his cloak. Although this thing's damp now, yuck. You know, I was thinking of making more of a grand entrance, saying a few words. But in the end, I just couldn't help myself but go boo. Selwyn stood his ground while the cold, white fear roved around inside him, prickling like the darkness. Ed was still unaware of the full effect he'd had. Got you going, didn't I? Selwyn was breathless. You've been waiting out here? For how long? Oh, you know, it's the old psychic powers. Ed tapped the side of his head. I just knew you'd be along soon. In the middle of the night? Silence crowded in the space between them. Ed flinched, petulant now. Hey, you're saying you didn't like my act? It was the perfect performance. He looked away, pinching his chin. But I might have to use... No, Ed, this was not okay. It was not okay to freak me out like this. So you're saying you deliberately ignored all my texts, my phone calls, made me feel like a right idiot for actually caring if you even might be dead in there. Hey, I'm not finished, Ed. That was a horrible, horrible trick. Why couldn't he think of any other words? It was nasty, it was borderline evil, but these felt like silly words, the language of a child. But that's how Ed had treated him. That's what Ed had reduced him to. What did you mean by it, Ed? Ed reached out a hand as if to pat Selwyn's shoulder, but just stopped short of touching him. Listen, Selwyn, I think you're missing the point. This was an amazing trick. I feel like I've gone to the next level of magicianship. I'm becoming a real wizard. The things I've discovered lately, you have to hear about these experiments I've been doing. I could use this. I could make a real show out of this. Something people would pay to go and see. But as he paced around, talking more to himself than his friend, Ed's voice sounded almost tinny to Selwyn. Selwyn watched, a frown crossing his forehead. This person he'd known, or thought he'd known for so long. The word friend caught in his throat at this cloaked fiend, rabbiting to himself about experiments and wizardry, his cloak seeming to tingle with pixelated dimness, as if the gold colour were doing battle with the darkness. The night still hung around them, a strange substance that swam. Selwyn rubbed his eyes, remembering how late it was. He should be in bed, sleeping. He was going to be a wreck in the morning. And Ed, this spoiled brat who used people, tricked people into practice for his own shows at their expense. Unable to look at him, Selwyn stared absent-mindedly at the back window of Ed's place, trying to work out what to do next. The window stared back, a big black square. The grey grass echoed back, ghost grass. The clothesline next to him, where Ed had stood just a moment ago, where Ed's jeans dangled alongside a frilled shirt, his favourite. A breeze blew, lifting the fabric, and Ed's cloak billowed out, then dropped, as if resting after a long sigh. Selwyn froze. Where was Ed? His friend had stopped talking. Selwyn turned, scoured the garden. Nothing, no one to be seen. Just those clothes wavering on the line. Ed? He found himself shouting. Neighbours be damned. Ed, not again. I'm serious. If you do this again, I'm walking out of here and never coming back. Ed? You can forget everything. The pub nights, your piano intro man, the pints. Selwyn's voice broke in spite of himself. His fury, the heat of it, instantly soaked into this cold, dank air where the clothes dangled and wavered on the line. How did all those clothes get up there, pegged and everything? When he came into the garden, there'd only been the cloak. Aside from any disappearing tricks, camouflage, mirrors, hidden doors, how did Ed get all those clothes up there without Selwyn seeing or hearing a thing? Something made him turn to the back window again, the blackened space. In the echo of the glass, the clothes' reflections moved. They flapped and began to pull together. Selwyn could only watch, his body frozen with a knowledge that made no sense. Something wasn't right. It wasn't Ed he'd been speaking to. It was an echo. The real Ed was somewhere else. The cloak opened, golden, wing-like, gathering the jeans and shirt into itself like a basket. Selwyn saw all this in the reflection. He couldn't turn. He didn't dare. For as the cloak cupped itself into a kind of pod, weightless over the grass, in the centre hovered an echo of Ed, like a king on a makeshift golden throne. Ed sat forward and nodded, this ghost of a friend, this man who'd searched for greatness in this world and had accidentally found it in another. Up he rose. As soon as Ed's reflection slipped beyond the top of the window, Selwyn turned, seeing nothing but an empty clothesline. Out the gate, through the alleyway, onto the street, running, dialing, Selwyn had found his reason. In Ed's bungalow was the physical remnant of Ed. Whether his heart still beat or not, His mind and his purpose were elsewhere. So that was creepy, wasn't it? I didn't realise I was going to such a dark place. I just let the story unfold, kept writing. Just to go back to the exquisite corpse that inspired this, the antiquated laundry built a golden throne for the grandiose taco. I think I've sort of done it. I've solved the puzzle of the exquisite corpse. Although for the laundry to be truly antiquated, maybe there'd have to be some kind of history to it. Ed had picked it up as a second-hand shop or something like that. I don't think it really matters, but that is one point I might consider when I come back to edit this, after it's rested, of course. At first, I was quite certain that Ed had died, but I kind of prefer leaving it slightly open at the end because it then has dreampunk potential. Dreampunk being fiction, usually fantasy, that explores different states of mind and consciousness, not just dreams, although in real life dreams are probably the best example that show us, on a regular basis, how we can experience things in different states of mind. And often, dreampunk stories allude to how our minds can accept a different set of rules of logic, ways of thinking that don't really make sense in so-called real life. Anyway, I think it may be time for some new rounds of Exquisite Corpse. What journeys of imagination lie in wait for us in the socks of destiny? So, the socks of destiny are bulging with lots of new entries. So thank you to everyone who's sent me words in the last couple of weeks. This is fantastic. For those who haven't listened before or played before, an exquisite corpse generates a very bizarre, intriguing sentence from the mixed up words of various people. But the structure is always the described thing, person or animal, did something to, with or for the described thing, person or animal. So let's get our first describing word. There are just so many. I'm sport for choice. So we have from Paul Benfield, fastidious. Okay, a fastidious character. Let's get our first noun from the noun sock. And this is from Anonymous. I've had quite a few anonymous ones. God. The fastidious god. Interesting. Can a god be fussy? Maybe. We can create whatever mythological being we want. So let's have a look at the actions, or the action. So this is from Tracy, who's given her Twitter ID as Magna Carta 1967, if you want to look her up. Rolled down the street to catch hold of. Wow. I'm imagining a god rolling down the street to catch hold of someone. This is a very strange thing for a god to be doing. So let's see what else. What was the god after? See, we have lots trying to climb out. This is from Fraser Armitage. Irascible. Okay. Why would you want to catch someone who's irascible? I suppose if they've committed a crime or punched you on the nose, that's a good reason to run after them. Even if you're a god. Okay, let's see. This is from Mariah. Boy. Ooh. So this feels like a cheeky character. The irascible boy. Perhaps he has punched someone on the nose or stolen something. But the fastidious god. Let me just read out the whole thing, first of all. It always helps for me to jot these things down. So let me do that. It is the fastidious god rolled down the street to catch hold of the irascible boy. Interesting. So it's easier to imagine what an irascible boy is, or in what ways it may a boy will express bad-tempered behaviour and annoy someone to the point that they will run after him and try to catch him. But a fastidious god rolling down the hill? This is rather peculiar, but actually that's the thing we need to question here in order to find some kind of story, because of course all stories are based on conflict, and sometimes that can come from things that just don't fit, which is where Exquisite Corpse is brilliant, because nothing really fits, at least to start with. We make it fit. It's a puzzle for us to solve. So, interesting that a god rolls down a hill. It sounds to me as if this god has been reduced to human form. A god has been trapped in a human being's body. And to top it all, it's a fastidious god, so it's a fussy god. A fussy god is trapped inside a human's body, and when a boy comes in to the pub, I don't know why this god is drinking in a pub, he wants to experience human life in all its forms. So he's sitting in a pub, maybe he's grumbling to the barmaid what his life was like when he had better days. He's maybe not explaining everything to her. He doesn't want to give away this, quite frankly, it's going to sound ludicrous story about him being an actual god. But he's having a grumble anyway, drinking a pint and complaining about how his life has changed. And a boy rushes in, bumps into him, maybe knocks over a stool. Perhaps the boy has stolen something and is running away from someone. Yes, there's a shout in the street. The boy is running away. He's stolen, I don't know, he's stolen some food. He's stolen a banana from a grocer's. And there's some furious people running after him, shouting, "Catch that boy!" And this fussy god thinks, oh, I don't want to get involved in this. But the boy has knocked into him, he's annoyed him, and the god thinks, yeah, do you know what? I used to be able to dole out justice on a grand scale. I am a god, trapped inside this hideous human body. I mean, as a fussy god, perhaps he would find it hideous to be dirty, sweaty. Go with me on this. So the boy rushes out again, and now the god takes after him, running down the hill, rolling down the hill. This is just really weird, but maybe if that's not interesting enough for a story, maybe it's the beginning of a story. I often look at these as beginnings. It's an opening scene. You go with your opening scene. When I imagined the antiquated laundry, I had a single image of clothes on a line, and I followed it through. I wrote, it was probably for more than 20 minutes, but I just went for it and followed my instincts and allowed it to blossom. So this doesn't have to be the entirety of the story. This is a beginning, and we are introduced to this character, and I think the thing to focus on is this discomfort of this fussy god, that he has to run after people. He rolls down the hill, getting even more dirty, and he's part of the rabble. How would this experience change him? But is there more to it? Are there more crimes being committed that he starts to feel that he needs to investigate further as to some of the things that are going on in the village? Maybe it seems like a normal village on the surface of things, but we don't know yet why or how this god has been reduced to a human being's form. So that can be something, just a question you have in the back of your mind as you start to write this, and maybe it will come to you, and maybe there's a connection with the boy. This poses some rather interesting story questions. But in the meantime, I think it is time for another Exquisite Corpse. Oops, I've got one that's just jumped from the sock. Clearly it wants to be read. This is from Paul Thomas. Waspish. Okay, so we're full of bad-tempered characters today. This is rather interesting. So let's see who or what was waspish. This is from... Ooh, getting caught on my finger again. This is from Alessandro Bozzo. Blacksmith. The waspish blacksmith. Okay, what did they get up to? Let's grab an action. This is from the very strangely named Walk on Poo, with an H on the end. Smooched. Ooh, okay, interesting, different turn of events here. Let's see what we've got next. This is from Andy. Dilapidated. How can you smooch something that's dilapidated? Well, how can you smooch a thing? This is very, very weird. Okay, let's not pass judgment until we've found the last word. Have a look. Aha, this is from Twitter ID EdgeOErin1. Mammoth. Not just a mammoth, but a dilapidated mammoth. Oh, God. Okay, let me just take a breath and have a look at the entire Exquisite Corpse. We have the waspish blacksmith smooched the dilapidated mammoth. Okay, I think it's time for some green tea, don't you? Give that a little stir, and hopefully this may help. Right. Okay, I think my first question must be, what is a dilapidated mammoth? Okay, let's return to what we do know. We have a blacksmith creating tools in his workshop, but also he mends things. Maybe sometimes he mends unusual objects. Anything really made of metal. He's quite happy to mend whatever people bring to him, no questions asked. And I wonder if a mammoth, a metal mammoth, or a mammoth piece of armoury, or armour for a mammoth that's become dilapidated. Ooh, so he's just quite happily, innocently getting on with his day. Well, he's waspish, so he's quite grumpy today. And a stranger has brought in a rather unusual piece of armoury that's become dilapidated for him to mend and bash back into shape. But it does appear to be pieces of armoury, and that don't seem to be for a human at all. It seems to be for a very large animal. So who is this stranger? And how come they have this bizarre armoury? Is there a war in a strange land? that he knows nothing of, a world that is cheek by jowl with this one, but he has no access to it. There's a rumour about a portal nearby, but he's never believed it. He's a simple blacksmith, very grounded, very sensible and down to earth. So he doesn't believe these rumours, but this man has come in, asking him to use his skills to mend armoury that just looks like nothing he's ever seen before. Who is this person, and what is this war that involves trained animals, giant animals? I feel like we've skirted over the top of some very bizarre fantasy. Yes, indeed. I quite like that. I'm going to let that rest and move on to the next and final Exquisite Corpse of the day. This is from somebody called Styler. Great. Okay, that's the word, by the way. I mean, it's great that Styler has sent words, but you know, the word is great. The noun is from Anonymous. Young woman. Great young woman. Let's see. What else do we have? This is from Alessandro Bozzo again. Stood across from. Interesting. Slightly ambiguous. It kind of leaves it open. Perhaps she's observing someone, but why? This is from Andy. Thirsty. That's an interesting word. Finally, final noun is from Paul Thomas. Panda. Oh my goodness. That is ridiculous. The great young woman stood across from the thirsty panda. Okay, I definitely need some more green tea. Just give me a moment. Right. What is this if it is not a visit to the zoo? Because why else would you stand across from a panda unless you were actually you're out in the wild and in the wilds of China, and you saw a panda? How would you know if they're thirsty? Unless the panda is attracted to your water bottle, as you know, you just have a little drink and the sloshing sound draws the attention of this panda who wants to come up to you. It's very cute. I'm struggling to think of a story idea that we could pull from this. Let's think. What makes this woman great in this context? Is she a conservationist? Maybe there are illegal hunters, poachers who are trespassing these forests to kill pandas, to sell their fur. She's gone there with the sole purpose of trying to catch them and stop them. But surely no person would do that alone, because they're bound to be outnumbered by some very aggressive and violent people. But maybe she went with a group and she's split up with her companions. Either she or they have got lost in these parts. And she stumbles across a panda, or a panda stumbles across her when it sees her drinking from a stream because it too is thirsty. It's a magical moment to come face to face with this beautiful creature she's travelled all this way to try and protect. But then she hears a rustle of leaves behind her. Is that one of her companions? One of the people she's come with? She can't see anyone. Why would they hide from her? Why wouldn't they call out? They can surely see it's her. They'd recognise her backpack, her hat. And then she hears a click of a gun. There you go. The beginning of something. It's not just a visit to the zoo. I hope I've inspired you today and given you some story ideas, or the beginnings of story ideas that you might be able to work with. Just try sitting down with pad and paper or with a laptop or even your phone and just start writing one of these story ideas. All you need is an initial image or a feeling of a scene or a character or something like that, some form of conflict. Just that helps to kind of draw your attention into what the story might actually be about and where it might move towards some kind of resolution or something grisly happening. Anyway, until next time, go forth and be inspired. I hope you enjoyed today's Brainstorium. You can find out more about Exquisite Corpse and my series, The Book of Exquisite Corpse, at annatizard.com. Subscribe to my e-newsletter and you'll get Volume 1 for free. And while you're there, why not submit a few words to the Socks of Destiny on my play page? You may inspire me or inspire yourself to write a unique new story. See you next time.